The Mionix Naos Pro is an updated variant of the original Mionix Naos, with the same well-known shape but with many improvements that will make this mouse relevant today. This mouse is one of the latest releases from the company, which is now under new ownership and is trying to relaunch itself. The Naos Pro looks identical with the original Naos, and no matter how you look at it, it's going to be hard to differentiate the old model from the new one. The improvements are all underneath, and we start with the sensor. The Naos Pro uses the new BMW3370 optical sensor, a sensor which can reach up to 19,000 dpi and has a tracking speed of 400 IPS. The Naos Pro can be acquired for around $70 US, give or take. We start with the basics, the shape. And this is what makes the Naos famous. In fact, this shape has been copied by a lot of other manufacturers with various degrees of success. Moving on from that, this shape is designed to be as comfortable as possible with a palm grip, which means that the Naos is best used for MMO and RPG type games, as first-person shooters really do need a narrower shape to facilitate the quick draw and aim required in these game styles. The coating used on the surface of the mouse is a definite improvement over the old Naos. In fact, this is a good coating when compared to other mice available right now. It's soft and evenly applied on the mouse. However, just like any other rubberized coatings, it will gather all sorts of debris and smudges. Going back to the shape, this mouse is not made for ambidextrous people. Plain and simple, it's clearly made for right-handed users. The top part of the casing is angled upwards on the left side and downwards on the right side. The right side is shaped to provide a good base for your fingers. Unfortunately, thanks to this wide base and sloped shape, this mouse is not that easy to pick up. On the left side, things are simpler. The casing is shaped inwards to allow easy access to the two side buttons and to make the mouse feel more comfortable for your fingers. Speaking of side buttons, these by default are mapped as forwards and backwards and will work as such in most apps. Don't worry, you can reassign them with the software included with the mouse, but more on that later on. The main clicks of the Naos Pro have good tactile feedback and the switches are responsive. Oh, and the switches, those are made by Kale, but again, more on that later on when we take this thing apart and see what's inside. At the top of the mouse and pretty much dead center on the casing, there are two buttons. These are the DPI cycle switches, and these two have a good tactile feedback. Not as good as the main clicks of the mouse, but good enough for their purpose. The side buttons are a different story, with a solid and clicky feel, a complete departure from what other manufacturers are offering for side buttons. The scroll wheel is made from two parts, an outer rubber ring and a semi-transparent plastic in the middle. This is done to allow the RGB light to be seen from the outside, which is pretty obvious. In terms of the feel of the scroll wheel, it is a massive improvement over the previous models, and to be completely honest, it is one of the best I've used. It is solid, has a smooth rotation and no play in its mechanism. Also, it is silent and has a good tactile feedback on the middle click. The underside of the Naos Pro has been reworked a bit, in the sense that it has different skates that are white and have a smooth texture with well-defined edges. In terms of the RGB, the Naos Pro has just two RGB components, the scroll wheel at the front and the Mionix logo at the back of the mouse. These can be illuminated at the same time or separately, and everything RGB wise is customized through the software that is included. The cable of the Mionix Pro has a length of around 1.8 meters and it is advertised as being ultra flexible. It's not ultra flexible, it's just flexible and that's that. It's lightweight enough to not drag on your mousepad, but I've seen cables that weigh less and are much more flexible. The connector used here is a regular USB 2.0 and there's nothing else to tell. Taking this mouse apart is simple as the casing is attached to the base with just 5 small screws. Each screw is hidden underneath the skates of the mouse, so be careful when you take it apart as the skates can be easily damaged. With the top casing removed, we get to see the inner works of the Naos Pro, and there's plenty to talk about here. We start at the front. The main switches which are used for the clicks are made by Kale. This looks to be the GM8 transparent switches. This model is used in a lot of newer mice as they offer a good tactile feedback and sound. The switches are rated for around 80 million clicks and have an operating force of 65 grams. The switch of the scroll wheel, you know, the one used for the middle click, is made by TTC. The same cannot be said about the scroll wheel, which is made by Alps. Speaking of TTC made switches, both side buttons use a red plunger TTC mechanical switches, which explains why they feel so good to the touch. The DPI buttons placed at the top of the mouse are using mechanical switches as well, but those are made by a company that I have yet to identify. The main control unit used on this mouse is a STM32 manufactured by ST Microelectronics. Oh, and one thing good to see is that the cable can be removed from the PCB and thus be easily replaced. It's not like your cable will break anytime soon, but it's good to know that it's an easy job to replace it. Now that you know what makes this mouse work, it's time to hear this mouse, and that's what you'll get right now. When we talk about the software, there's no other way of saying this, it's an improvement. It's simple, easy to use, and does not seem to require an online connection to work properly, a thing which a lot of manufacturers seems to be struggling with. The first page of the software has the main settings of the mouse, which includes the double clicking speed, the scrolling speed, and the pulling rates. Here you can also select and configure the 5 available profiles. On the left side you can also configure what each of the buttons do. The second page, which is called Sensor Performance, deals with exactly that, the sensor, and its behavior. The main function here is choosing which DPI value is assigned to a step in the DPI cycle profile. On the lower part, the lift-off distance can be configured alongside the angle snapping and the ripple control. There is also a surface analyzer tool available here, but it's a hit or miss on some mousepads, especially on those made from metal. The third page of this software is the RGB controller. Here you can set up all that is linked to the RGB illumination. This includes the pattern used for the LEDs, such as breathing or color cycle, among other things. The final 2 pages are the micro editor, which lets you assign the buttons of the mouse to a different function, and finally there is the support page, which allows you to update both the firmware of the mouse and the software itself. The first test is a standard Microsoft Paint test. This is done with the mouse sensor set at different DPI settings. In the case of the Naos Pro, these values are 1600, 3200, 4300 and 19000 dpi. And as you can see, everything looks pretty good until we hit the magical number that is 19000. And it's nothing to worry, nobody will ever use 19000 dpi, not in any real Dell usage anyway. Apart from that, I'd say that the sweet spot for gaming on this mouse would be between 1400 dpi and 2000, depending on your screen resolution, mouse mat and your personal preference. Even at 4300 dpi, the mouse is usable. For all values, there is no angle snapping present and the jitter is present, but only at the highest dpi value, as you would expect. The second test is called the velocity test, and it's used to mainly see if the sensor begins to malfunction if the speed of the mouse suddenly changes. The wider the spread of the dots, the worse it is, but as is the case for many Pixar sensors, the one used on the Naos Pro works just as intended with only a minimum spread. The Mionix Naos Pro is a good and comfortable mouse, and an upgrade from the old Naos model. The shape of the mouse is something which you will either like it or dislike it, based on how you want to use it. It's clearly made for a palm style grip, even though I was able to use it with a claw grip as well. The main disadvantage of this shape is that being this wide, it's very hard to firmly grab the mouse and lift it, a crucial thing to have for fast-paced first-person shooters. The cable is alright, it's flexible, but sometimes it has a tendency of retaining its shape. Basically, if you have the cable bent for several hours, it will keep that shape until you straighten it out. It's not a deal breaker, but it's there. The performance of the mouse is good. The new PixArt sensor does deliver on its promises, and it performs just the same on both a textile mat and a metal-made mousepad. The rubber coating present on this mouse is soft, but it will eventually gather all sorts of marks. It's the nature of such coatings, so don't say I didn't warn you about it. The Naos Pro is good and makes a good stand against the competition. It's not for everyone though, and that's not the fault of the mouse itself, it's just how it is when you use a specific shape which only works with a specific grip and hand size. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and also, if you want to support me in a direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the 2000 star pages of this channel.